Otto, why don't we start off with your parents? Tell us a little bit about your father, where he was born.
Well, my father was born in Carpathian area, Romania, in a little village, and it was actually part of Transylvania. It was under Romanian rule. He was born in 1904. He was the oldest of 7 children. My mother was born in 1906, and she was born in a village city called Niponau, which is really a Ukrainian name, but it was under the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. In the disputed area, they gave the city another name. They called it Haslova, which my mother usually refers to Haslova, and they existed there. And my grandfather had a little farm, and it was a famous place for mineral water. So he started a business selling mineral water in different cities, and he was quite successful.
What language did your parents speak growing up?
Well, they spoke, I would say, 3 or 4 languages. My father spoke Romanian, Hungarian. He spoke a little bit of Czech. And my mother, she spoke, of course, she spoke Hungarian, she spoke Czech, she spoke Ukrainian, and maybe some German, because she said she had German heritage from years back.
Okay. And then where did your parents meet?
Well, my father actually used to, they somehow knew each other through family. My father used to visit the village every once in a while, and he kept corresponding with my mother over the years, many, many years.
And so they got married. Where did they get married there? Or?
Oh no, my father got into the Romanian army. He was there a good couple of years, and then he went to Paris to live in Paris for a while to learn. He had been taught a trade in Romania, tailoring, sewing and cutting material, and he decided to go to the fashion heart of Europe, which is Paris, in the 20s and the early 30s, where he managed to get a diploma in I think it was designing clothes, which he enjoyed very much. And my mother graduated the 8th grade. They didn't have any grades much higher, especially for women. And she went to another city called Munkac to work. And then she came back to her mother's house, mother's village in Haslova.
Okay, so where did they get married?
Well, actually, my mother was asked by her older sister, who had a successful business in Holland, Hague. It was a famous city in Holland, to come there and bring their mother along and bring another sister along and live with her. And so she went there in 1933, and she joined her sister's business, and they were very successful. And my father, after corresponding in 1934, he went to Holland also. And they did get married in Holland, Hague, and in 1934.
Okay, so they married in Holland. And
yes.
They lived there? And
they lived there till actually 1939, till Nazi Germany's darkness started getting closer and closer. Actually, the war was starting in 1939.
When did the Nazis come to Holland?
Well, my parents weren't around when they came, but in 1939 they were starting to head that way. They're bombing quite a few countries, and he knew the war had just about started. And my father actually has started seeing posters on the door where he lived. It's kind of derogatory to Jewish people. Jewish people get out. So he told my mother, "We got to get out. We have to get out away from here." And so he took my mother, and had a daughter too. My older sister was about 4 years old, and they went back to the mother's farmhouse in Haslova, which is like Hungary. And my mother's sisters, they all went over there to live.
What year did the Nazis? When did the Nazis come into Hungary then?
Actually, it wasn't the Nazis first. It was something called the Arrow Cross. The Nazis had a the Hungarians had a homegrown Nazi party called the Arrow Cross, sometimes called the White Cross. It was a very nationalistic party. They believed in Hungary getting back. A lot of its territories were lost in World War I. But a lot of territory was in Czechoslovakia, Romania, Carpathia, and they're also somewhat racist too. And they elected a very conservative called Horthy. He was the admiral. He became the ruler of Hungary. And the Hungarians started, but there was a faction of them that was becoming, you might say, very anti-Semitic and very racially motivated, they're very angry at gypsies and foreigners and Jews. They really didn't like a lot of people of that nature.
So they were working together with the Nazis and
Somewhat.
controlling.
Well, Hungary is considered like a puppet state of Germany during World War II, starting in 1941. Both of them didn't like Russia. You know, Hungarians didn't like Russia, and Germany, of course, that became their enemy. They didn't like Russia either. So they worked together. But actually, I was reading some interesting material that this guy, Horthy, he was like betraying Hitler. Even though he joined him in a pact, he was trying to make peace with the Allies behind Hitler's back. And Hitler found out about it in '43. And he made him retire, and he kicked out his prime minister, and he put in the head of the Hungarian Arrow Party, who was really a Nazi Hungarian, and they took over.
When did that start affecting your parents then?
Well, actually, in 1941, from what my parents told me, they started rounding up Jews. They went to synagogues. In fact, my father really wasn't completely Jewish, but he knew that he was walking past a synagogue and someone told him, "Don't go in there," and they already started arresting Hungarian Jews in 1941.
What do you mean he wasn't completely? You mean he wasn't practicing Judaism?
He wasn't. Let's say he wasn't practicing Judaism, right? So he was lucky in that way. He didn't go to any place where Jewish people congregated, because wherever Jewish people congregated, they were being arrested, and they were being deported and sent not to Germany, but they had already established places in Hungary to keep certain people there in certain areas. But all these people transported really to Budapest, it was the main city. They didn't let them stay anymore in the country. They were gone from the country.
And so did they arrest your father?
Actually, my father started getting nervous then too. He started seeing different signs. He figured it was only a matter of time before they arrested his mother and everybody, and his wife and his children. So his brother, who had been living in Budapest, he was a member of the Workers' Socialist Party, which is, you might say a communist party, I'm not exactly sure, but they were a socialist party, and they're pretty powerful in Hungary, because at one time in the 1930s, actually, Hungary had a communist government, and they were overthrown. That's how the conservatives came in. And he told my father if he came to Budapest, they would be able to protect him, and they'd give him, maybe some passports, and maybe he can move on. So he decided to move his family, my mother and his daughter, to Budapest.
So they were keeping one step ahead of.
Right. He was trying to keep one step ahead of whatever's going to come. He noticed it already.
Did that turn out to be a good move?
Well, everybody in the countryside was taken away by the Arrow, by the Hungarian Nazis. They're all taken away, and they're all put in internment camps. So they were gone. Some of them were starting to be sent out of the country already. But the real transportation didn't start till Germany started they called it the Margeta. It's a Hungarian word. Margeta, that's what they called when they started taking over Hungary. Was it Margeta? I don't know what the second part of it was.
What year that was?
That was at the end of 1943.
Okay.
That's when they disposed of Horthy. He was a president, and they disposed of his prime minister, and they put their own people in there.
Okay. And so then what happened to your parents there?
Well, my parents, they moved to Budapest in 1941, and they got an apartment. The apartment where they originally lived was Christian and Jewish. It wasn't an area which was just Jewish people. But the Hungarian Nazis are already starting to look at everybody's passports. Your passport in Hungary was marked if you were Jewish, or you belong to certain ethnicities. There were other ethnicities the Hungarians didn't like. They didn't like Romanians, they didn't like Czechs, they didn't like Gypsies, they didn't like a lot of people. They considered them enemies of the state. So they already started, they aggressively started calling these people out, and they're being watched. But they lived there. My parents lived there. 1943, they were doing okay until 1943. 1943, things really started changing, because they started forming shooting gangs. The Hungarian Arrow Cross started forming gangs, like you might say hooligans. They were trying to shoot people. started to take them out and shoot them. And in fact, they took, I was reading in the history books, they took 200 people. I don't even know these people, what they were, Jewish or whatever. They chained them together with chains. They shot all of them and they threw them in the Danube River. And
So by this point, your parents have survived a good portion of the war.
right, they were, in a way they were lucky they went to Budapest, because they would have stayed in the countryside, they would have been already, I don't know where, they would have been gone.
Right. So what happened to them in Budapest in 40?
Well, Budapest in '43, they came and he said they already starting to make like districts of Budapest into ghetto-like. They made quite a few ghettos in Hungary, but the biggest one is the main one, the Budapest ghetto, where my parents lived in, and it's starting to be very Jewish, and people accumulating to live there. And eventually they came there, this is Hungarian Nazis, and said all the Jews have to, all the Jewish men have to come outside, and had a name for it. They have to go to Arbeiten, they have to go to work, which is really a form of slave labor, shall we say. And my father had to go and join go outside of the ghetto, which is starting to form. He went outside and he was enrolled in the Arbeiten, in the slave labor.
So your mother and her children are in the ghetto?
Right, they stayed there, yes. They stayed in the apartment that they had, and they had and to take my father's place, other people were moving in. And before I knew it, my mother had other people living with her, with children, with grandparents. They all lived in like in one apartment.
So they closed off the ghetto, and they couldn't go,
Right.
Jewish people couldn't go out or in for the most part?
In 1944, they built a wall with barbed wire, and it really had only one entrance to leave. And people were only allowed to leave at 11 o'clock for 1 hour, to scrounge for food or whatever. You had 1 hour to get out of the ghetto and look for whatever you had to look for.
So, but she was able to remain in the apartment that she had because that was
Remain in the
within the
apartment,
ghetto.
yes. She remained in the apartment. She shared it. It was kind of a little bit crowded because she shared it with, must have been about 7, 8 people already living in her apartment. But that was just a circumstance. She had no choice about that. And she didn't mind. Some of the people were nice because, they had children and they'd watch each other's children. Mother had a young baby, and they'd watch each other and they'd help each other out.
And your father was taken to the slave camp.
Right. My father was in slave camp. My father was working on an, I do know, he told us he's working building landing strips for the German airplanes in outside Budapest. That was his job. And he did that for 8 months, actually. Within the 8-month period, he sometimes came home. Nobody knows how he managed to come home, but he somehow got away from his assignment, and he usually brought home food. And he came to visit my mother, and he always brought her food, and they're happy. He stayed there a couple of hours. Next day, he had to go back.
So it wasn't exactly a concentration camp, it was a slave labor
It was
camp.
actually slave labor, where
He
you
actually did work.
were beaten, and I don't know how he got food, but they gave him some kind of food, and they usually got beaten a lot, and you worked in the sun or the cold weather, and you really had to work.
And occasionally he was able to come home.
Occasionally, we don't know how he did it, but occasionally he was able to get home to Budapest and visit his wife and his child and to spend a little time with them. But he always had to leave. He had to leave before they went looking for him. Let's put it that way. He was missing too long. They would come after him.
And that lasted for 8 months.
That slave labor lasted for 8 months. Actually, we didn't know what happened, but after 8 months, he didn't come back anymore. He was gone. He never came again.
Someone had taken on a march?
Well, we found out later on what happened was as the Russian soldiers were heading toward Budapest, the full-scale war, the Germans were trying to get rid of a lot of things like slave labor, and the Jews, they're trying to hide them or just exterminate them very fast. So what they did with the slave labor troops, they decided to give them a death march, which the Nazis gave quite a few times, death marches, where they, actually the Japanese gave, I don't want to bring this up, the Japanese gave the Americans a death march in Bataan too, but the Germans were a little bit worse. They actually
Hoping
shot
that
you.
people would die along the way.
Yeah, they didn't want, the concentration camps already filled up. The trains that were importing people were already filled up already. They weren't working, and so the best thing to do was to march these people. And most of them died. Out of 15,000 people on march, maybe only 1,000 or 2,000 made it to where they were going to. And most people were shot. They just shot and left on the road. And it was, it was just one of those tragedies that the Nazis accomplished.
So your mother was able to stay there? They didn't round her up? They didn't
No,
round her up,
my
or-
mother didn't know her. They left the women with the children alone because it was still under the arrow cross on Hungarians. Hungarians were a little bit different. They were pretty bad, but they weren't. They were a little bit different than Nazis. The Nazis they had a killing machine in mind. They already had that done. The Hungarian Nazis were a little bit different, a little bit slower when it came to that.
Why don't you share with us some of the stories that your mom experienced in the ghetto? And
You know, it's a matter of life and death every day, really. She didn't know, my mother attributes her survival really is luck most of the time. I mean, most of the time she used to scrounge for food, and they had a rule.
luck of God's providence.
Well, it's providence. Something was going on, something beyond. I guess God wanted to keep her alive. You know, they had a rule, the Hungarian Nazis, where if you had a child less than a year old, you were allowed to go outside. You're allowed to go outside and go wherever you wanted to go. But if you have a child more than a year old, you had to go to again, like my father did, some kind of work in a factory. These are women and everything. So one of the stories my mother told me, of course, that she went to the door one day, to the gate, to go outside, let me get some food. And she, the guard at the door, he asked her in Hungarian, he said, how old is your child? And she said, he's less than 1 year old. Actually, my brother was already getting closer too. But, you know, they knew who was in the ghetto, so that, you know, they knew there was a young baby was there. So the guy he didn't say anything, they just pointed, and she walked very fast. But as she was walking out the door, she had another woman behind her. They asked her she asked if she had a child less than 2 years old, and she said no. And so the guard said, well, you have to go to work. And she said, no, I'm not going to go to work. And then she heard 2 gunshots, and that was it. She said she just kept on walking. And many times when she walked in the street, she would see a woman in the street or something. These guys came from nowhere and just shot them. You have to wear an armband, by the way. If you're Jewish, you have to wear an armband. If you didn't have an armband, they suspected you being Jewish, you'd be shot, no questions asked. These are the Hungarian Nazis. These weren't the Nazis, the Gestapo yet. You know, and really there's some days my mother told me she had no food at all, and she doesn't know how a lot of, especially children, she didn't know how they really survived. You know, they were crying, whatever, but, you know, but somehow they managed to live to another day, you know. And, well, one time she had heard a story that they're giving out food in an old Jewish, I think it was a synagogue or something. They're giving out frankfurters and donuts. And so, you know, so she went outside and she was going to head straight to that place. As she was walking to the place, a man ran by and said, don't go in there. Just shot everybody in there. So that was a lucky break. She avoided getting shot. Even though she was hungry, she avoided getting killed.
So if she would have been there just a little bit earlier, she would have
She'd been a little bit early. They did give out food, actually. Actually, they were giving out food. They gotten food from the Jewish agency, and they're giving out food to the people. But obviously, for whoever it was, I think it was the Hungarian Nazis, for them it was a good opportunity to kill as many people as they could. So they just went in there, just shot everybody, you know.
Now, she was Hungarian, so she had a Hungarian passport.
She didn't have she did have Hungarian passport. She did have Hungarian passport. Because actually, when she lived in Budapest, twice she went back to visit her mother. I was listening to the tape. She went back sometime in 1941. She also went back in 1943 to stay with her mother about 6 months, for about 6 weeks, because one of her sisters, her son died, and had a lot of family issues, and she wanted to see her mother. So she went back there. But that was before her mother was taken away to Auschwitz. Her mother and her 2 sisters were eventually taken to Auschwitz.
So your grandmother and 2 aunts.
Right, and actually eventually it was more than 2 aunts. She met other aunts there, and they try to hang around together. They try to, relatives would try to help each other in a way, you know, try to hang around with each other. And but it wasn't much of a choice. As soon as they went in the door into Auschwitz, there was a man sitting there, and he looked at you, and he didn't say anything. He just pointed left or right. If he pointed to the right, you went to the gas chamber, and you were burnt. To the left, you met the famous Dr. Mengele. He's famous for a lot of things. You would just be a woman. These are mostly women who went there. He went to some kind of, I don't know what kind of forced labor they gave them, but some of my aunts survived for 3 years yet in Auschwitz. I don't know how they did it, but they managed to do it. But But my aunts told my mother later on that's the last thing they ever saw of the grandmother, and the great aunt was that time. She was gone.
So your grandmother, they were taken
She was
immediately.
elderly and weak. If you were strong, they let you go to the left.
So your
As
aunt
work.
saw your grandmother be taken?
Yeah, that was a very, very painful
The gas
experience for my aunts and my mother. After the war, she kept on having dreams about her mother being burnt alive.
So she wasn't with her aunts, but the aunts
No,
told her
the
that
aunts
story.
told her what happened to her.
They
mother.
survived.
They survived somehow in Auschwitz. I don't know how they survived. Well, they had their own stories, but they survived the 3 years or so in Auschwitz. And, one of my aunts did tell me she met Dr. Mengele, and he, and after the war she got married to a man who was also a survivor, and she couldn't have any kids. She blamed it on Dr. Mengele, whatever, I don't know.
Sure.
A lot of stories came out of that tragedy.
Okay, so back to your mom in the ghetto area, having a hard time getting food, able to hold on to that apartment. People moving in.
Right,
and
she
out?
held on to the apartment. It was rough. She had she was basically her best friend was this elderly woman who had a daughter and 2 other daughters, and they really helped each other out. And they really, and actually one day someone slipped a note underneath the door saying, "Bring your daughters to a certain street in Hungary," and that was it. And my mother didn't know what it was. She was frightened. She didn't know what it was. And she asked the other woman. The other woman says, "Yeah, I got a note like that too." She says, "We'll have to follow that." I don't know who that woman is, but she's trying to help us out. So my mother was very hesitant, but she took the other woman's 2 daughters, because one of the women had to stay home and take care of the baby. There was a little boy there, my brother. And so she took the 3 girls, and she went outside the ghetto. And she went to Second Street, and she saw a woman dressed in black. And the woman just pointed to her, and the 3 girls went there, and they just left. And that was the last she saw of her daughter. And she was very, very, very hurt. She didn't know what to do, but the woman, when she came back, the woman told
She
her.
didn't know who that woman was?
She didn't know who that. She had no idea who that woman was, but
Your sister was just taken away by that?
But just taken
later.
away. Actually was a good person. It was a good Christian fellowship who actually belonged to the Socialist Party, who was helping hide children. That's what it turned out at the end of the war. But she was very perturbed for a long time. She went back to the apartment. She didn't know what happened to her daughter. But they discussed, these women discussed among themselves, and listen, look, everybody is dying. They're dying of disease, dying of hunger. At least, your daughter will be alive after the war.
So your mother's lost her husband. He's gone off.
Right, they all disappeared. She really didn't
Daughter's
have
now
anything. They just had a
she doesn't
son.
know exactly where.
Right, she didn't know.
But your brother is there. Her son is there.
Her son is there, right. And actually, she heard from someone that they were giving out visas, that the Swedish government under Raoul Wallenberg was giving out visas. And so she took off. And a lot of people, I guess, not that you couldn't leave too many people at one time from the same apartment. You could really leave, like, let's say, one per person from the apartment, You couldn't leave. My mother told me she did most of the walking because the lady was an elderly lady, and her daughter wasn't on top of things too much. She wasn't too fast, so she really wasn't really outside too much. So my mother did most of the walking outside. So she was heading to the Swedish embassy, which wasn't too far away, but from what I understand, the line and everything was so big and everything that she really couldn't take a chance to wait or anything, because you couldn't stay outside the ghetto too long. They gave you an hour. They found you outside, you possibly never made it back, So she gave up on that. Then she went back, and someone told her the Swiss embassy is also giving out visas, These weren't exactly visas. They were called a certain thing. They said you were a Swiss citizen, or you said you were a Swedish citizen. And with that, you'd have with the Hungarians, you'd have some kind of amnesty. Later on, she found out with the German Nazis, it didn't mean anything at all. But anyway, the next day she went with another woman. She went with that woman with her. They both went down to the Swiss embassy, and what they did was the door was closed, but they went to the window and they knocked on the window, and the window opened up, and the lady gave them a piece of paper and pencil and said, "Write down your names." And they put their names in. They closed the window, and they left because they couldn't stay there long. They left. And next day they went back, and the woman threw out 2 visas for them, 2 Swiss visas, and they went back. They ran back to the ghetto. They were so happy they had the Swiss, but and actually they showed it to the Hungarian guards. The Hungarian guards had some kind of respect for that, a little bit scared, but unfortunately one day a guy drove up with a white limousine. He came out of the car with a white shirt, and with him was 6 or 7 guys on black motorcycles, dressed from head to toe in black. That was the Gestapo. And the person who came out of the car was a famous person, Adolf, was called, what was his name again? Eichmann. Adolf Eichmann came to visit the ghetto. And he just stood there in front and he looked. And he told all the Jewish women to come outside and drop the jewelry off. They had a box there. He said, leave all your jewelry in a box. And then he said, I want to see everybody's papers, he says. And a lot of people were afraid to show him the Swiss papers because the day before the Nazis were already there and they were tearing up the papers, just tearing them up and throwing them away. And the people went back in the ghetto. That was. But he said, don't worry about it. He said, let me see all your papers. And so he took the papers, and that was the end of the visa. That was gone. And he got back into his car and he left. Actually, it was already in 1944, and the Russians were advancing toward Budapest, and the Nazis were trying to figure a way what to do with the ghetto. And
the Swedish ones now
the Swedish ones were actually Raoul Wallenberg. They were kept in safe houses. Outside of the ghetto, there was a group of houses where 20,000 Jews were kept.
And that was considered Swedish homes?
Considered Swedish homes. Where they didn't really have food, they didn't have luxury, they didn't have anything, but at least they had their lives. And they were hidden there under Raoul Wallenberg.
And he served unknown amount of people that way?
Well, it was 20,000 people were actually living in those homes over there. Which some of them were destroyed anyway later on, but that's when all hell broke loose, But
so now, what about your brother? How did?
Well, it's a sad story. My brother was. My mother told me I was in. The Russians actually freed the ghetto on the 8th of November, but I'm trying to get the dates exactly right. Actually, they freed the ghetto. They freed Budapest on the 18th of November. But my brother, he started crying on the 8th. He started crying. She didn't know what to do with him. He was just crying. And next day he stopped crying. So I have to compose myself. I was going to tell the story. So my mother took the baby to a hospital. There was actually a Jewish hospital there for children. And she took my brother there, and the doctor looked at my brother and he said, he's dead. And she asked him what happened, and he said he probably died of pneumonia. And it was my mother was in shock. She didn't know what to do. And then the doctor told her, said, listen, look, go to the basement and take a look and see what you see in the basement. She went to the basement hospital, and there were hundreds, maybe thousands of children lying dead in the basement, on the floor. And the doctor says, what are we going to do with all those children? We're going to end up taking them to a mass grave. We're going to cover them up. The children are just dying. You can't do anything about it. And then my mother was approached by a woman, and this woman came to her. She knew what a woman was. A woman told her, listen, for 6 pengos, which is some carrying money, I'll give your son a casket. And we'll give him a decent burial. So she didn't know what to do. She didn't know what a woman was. But the woman said, listen, look, the last thing you do for your son is a casket. So she gave the woman her $6, and she left. She had to leave. She went back. And the next day she went back to the hospital to look for the casket. There was no casket, no woman, no doctor, nothing. Just if you looked in the basement, you still saw all those children lying there. It was just, and she didn't know what to do. She was very hurt and distraught when she went back to the ghetto. She didn't know what happened to her son. But then pamphlets started dropping from the skies saying that the Russians were coming, and other things happen in the ghetto too. Sometimes you go outside and you see actually in certain areas you see a train car go by with people sticking their hands out and asking for food. Those people are on their way to death camps. There's really not much you can do for those people. And
you told me a story about a young boy that your mother was helping.
Well, since things were so sad over there, a lot of orphans, mostly women were left in the ghetto. The men were all gone. Mostly women and some children, and a lot of dead in the street. And, you know, there's a lot of orphans. A lot of people didn't have parents. They didn't even know what happened to their parents. The parents just weren't there. And there was a boy, my sister told me, so it was an 8-year-old boy who my mother had taken into her. And and he lived with them, you know. But my sister and him went scrounging for food one day in Budapest. They snuck out, they went scrounging. They didn't wear the Jewish stars, you know. And they went and they were caught they're caught in the bridge over the Danube River. And the Hungarian arrow cross, they asked the boy what he was doing, and he didn't really answer them. They just shot him. They picked him up and they threw him in the river. That was the end of that. My sister was walking after him, but she wasn't exactly where he was. That's what she saw, and she just ran away. She just ran the other way. So it was just a terrible story, but that's how it shows you these, I don't know, masochists. I don't know what kind of people these were, you know.
So the Russians finally came in and
right,
liberated.
The Russians came in. They set up an office right outside the ghetto. They set up an office, and when they came marching in, you could hear them because they sang a song. You know, they sang a communist song. I don't know what it was, national song, and they knew that they were free. There weren't too many people left in the ghetto by that time. You know, it was about 200,000 people in the ghetto originally, and 90,000 were near to the end. And then it was down to maybe 20,000, you know. And who knows what condition these people were in. A lot of people died later on, too, because of medical reasons. But the Russians came, they set up a office outside, and all those guards who were outside, they ran away. You know, the Nazis and the Hungarian guards, they all ran away. And some of them actually changed sides. They became the Hungarian police.
Until your mother was then liberated and miraculously
My mother
survived.
somehow, she went outside. She had to keep on going outside to find out what was going on. She went outside one day. She came back. There's another woman in her apartment. You said, "What are you doing here?" The woman says, "It's my apartment. My husband was a soldier. He's coming home. It's my apartment. Get out of here." And she didn't know what to do. She went outside and she went to the police station. She told the police. And these police knew my mother because she was living there so many years. They actually knew she was a resident there. So they said, "We'll do something about this." And they went with her, one of the policemen went with her back to the apartment, and they told the woman, "You have to get out of here. This belongs to this woman. I know this woman. She's lived there for 8 years or whatever years. Get out of this apartment or we'll shoot you." And the woman got up and she left. And my mother got back to her apartment, amazingly not. Some of these soldiers, like I say, they were probably part of Arrow Cross Hungarians, and they watched all the people go in and out, so they knew who everybody really was.
And now with the Russians in,
Right, the Russians were in. The Russians didn't really bother too much. They just had their office, and they weren't really like the Americans. They didn't give that much aid and all that, but they did set up doctors and hospitals. They did have some kind of something. But they're busy setting up a communist government in Hungary, basically, you know. And then my mother was, my mother was praying for a miracle because she had nobody there. She didn't know what happened to her husband. She didn't know what happened to her daughter. And she was actually started fasting she told me she started fasting, and it was Tisha B'Av, a Jewish holiday, and she fasted for 2 days.
The destruction of the
destruction of the Holy Temple, the last temple, and she was fasting for 2 days. She was praying, and all of a sudden a neighbor came to her and said, "You know, you got a surprise downstairs." And she went downstairs, and there was her husband. He came back.
So he survived.
My father says he walked home from the Munchausen. That was the concentration camp he was in. That was in Linz, Austria. It was 535 miles away. That was the way he went on a death march from Budapest to Linz.
So he marched out there.
He marched out there and survived.
Walked back.
And he told my mother that he walked back. That he walked all the way back, and he managed to. It was a 2-week walk, but he managed to walk back to Budapest, Hungary, and he knew where he had to go. And they were so happy to see each other. They were united again. And
so he survived the concentration camp then. So he was in the slave labor camp for 8 months, and then the death march, and then to the concentration camp.
He was
and survived that.
Munchausen was originally set up as a labor camp. They had 30,000 Spanish prisoners there from the Franco-American war there. Yet they sent them from France. They were prisoners in France originally. They sent them to Munchausen to be in forced labor, slave labor. And later on, they expanded it to make it into a concentration camp. So one side was a concentration camp, and one side was a labor camp. And it was mixed up, Hungarians, Jews, Gypsies, the Slovaks, whoever they put there, they put there. And my father was actually probably in the labor part because he spoke Spanish pretty good, and I think the Germans took advantage of his speaking, because he told me he was an interpreter a little bit, and he probably spoke to the Spanish, because the Spanish didn't want to talk to the Germans. They're really angry. In fact, when they were freed by the Americans, they went crazy, and they really killed every German and every capo they could find it. And they raised the Spanish flag. They really went.
So the Americans liberated that camp.
The Americans liberated Mauthausen, right? My father's lying on the floor. He doesn't know how many days he's lying on the floor till someone shook him. He shook him, and he opened up his eyes. It was an American soldier, and he asked him, "Are you still alive?" And he said, "I'm not sure." He didn't know. He thought it was maybe in heaven or hell. And it was an angel. He didn't know what. He said, "I'm not sure," and he fainted again. But then the Red Cross must have come and taken him away. Actually, Munchausen, the way I read from American documents, when he went to the concentration camp, there were people just lying on the floor, just lying all over the floor. They didn't know. Nobody knew if they were alive or dead. So the American soldiers actually had to go with a mirror and see if they're breathing, or they had to shake them. Or else you didn't know these people were alive or not. These weren't just men. These are just women. There's also women and children who were there lying on the floor too. They had been left there. Munchausen didn't have gas chambers. They had a crematorium, but they didn't have gas chambers. So they would burn the bodies, but they didn't put you in gas chambers. That's why. But their idea was to let you just starve and work to death, and that was the end of that. Sure, that was the end of that. My mother also was very lucky too, because I didn't mention that the visit of Adolf Eichmann was when he looked over the Hungarian Budapest ghetto. He was trying to find out what to do with it. It was the Russians were advancing. He had to do something with it. He couldn't just. He was running out of options to take everybody to Auschwitz. They hit some roadblocks. They had reached some resistance from the Hungarians about taking people to Auschwitz. So what he did was he ordered the German commander general of Budapest, to burn the ghetto to the ground.
When your mom was living in?
When my mom was living there, near the end of the war, he told the commander, I don't remember his name, he told him to burn it to the ground. What happened was an Hungarian attaché to Wallenberg heard it from the police chief of Budapest, what Eichmann had ordered the German general to do, and he told Wallenberg about it. Wallenberg wrote a note to the German general. He told him the end of the war is coming. The Russians are here. If you burn down the village, if you burn down the ghetto, I'm going to tell the Human Rights Commission, the world, what you did, and you'll be hung. You'll be the first person hung. And he believed that stopped the German commander from burning down the Budapest ghetto.
And Wallenberg again was the Swedish ambassador.
He's Swedish ambassador to Hungary, but he was more than a Swedish ambassador. Actually, those are two neutral countries. Sweden and Switzerland were two neutral countries.
And after the war, just immediately after the war, the Russians sent for Wallenberg, called him in, and he was never seen from again.
They believe he died in a Russian labor camp. He must have known some secrets. The man knew a lot of secrets about Russians and Germans and everybody. And someone I guess, disposed of the poor man.
So your mother now is reunited with your
my husband, and
your daughter, or your sister, her daughter.
And they were wondering what happened. They're trying to figure out where maybe they could find my daughter and my sister. And my father said he thinks he knows where my sister is. And so they went outside and they went to this building, an office over there. And the communists are starting to be establishing themselves. He went to this office, and sure enough, in that office was that woman who had taken my sister.
Who hit her under the cloak?
He hit her on the cloak, and she also grabbed their hand, these three girls, and he took them away. And my sister was there too. My sister was reunited there with my parents, and they thanked her. My mother never knew the lady's name, but my father somewhat knew who they were, because there was a party over there. There were a group of good Christians who were saving Jewish lives, children.
It's miraculous. The story is miraculous.
So my sister was about 7 years old, and they went back to their apartment. And then from that? Well, from that they had to, the Americans were setting. They didn't want to stay in communist Hungary. You know, the Russians didn't have a very good reputation with everybody, and they were offered, the Jewish organization offered to send them to, they built up special displacement camps in Germany. They called DWT camps. My parents were transferred over there to, in Germany, where I was born, in Bavaria, in southern Germany, and it's in a village that the Jewish organization set up in Germany called Fuhrenwald, which is next to Bamberg. Actually, I was born in Bamberg, was a city. I tell you, I met a German man about 20 years ago in a Japanese restaurant in Manhattan, and he came from Bamberg, and I was talking to him. He told me he never heard of my village, because the village was really like for only displaced people. I remember a lot of American soldiers there, all over the place, and there was a black forest, and a lot of bombed-out buildings. And I'm sure the village doesn't exist anymore. And people were waiting to be transported, and they wanted to transport my parents first to Arizona. But my father said, no, he doesn't know anybody in Arizona. He doesn't know where that place is. He says, we go to New York. He knew some relatives there. They went there 100 years ago. He said, we want to go to New York. So we ended up taking a nice boat ride to London to New York.
Can you explain who these people are?
Well, this picture was taken in 1947. I'm the baby there. I really must have been 6, 7 months old, a little bit fat. There's my...
That's all that good New York food, right? If you were in Arizona, you would have been thin, so...
They kept relationships, some friends in Arizona, but they were in New York. They had a lot of relatives. That's my mother, Esther. That's me, Otto. That's my older sister, Greta.
The one who went through the Holocaust?
Right, she actually lived through the Holocaust, and she was saved by the woman. And she was born in Holland, in Hague. And that's my sister, Anne. She was born in Budapest, Hungary, actually, 1946, after the war. And that's my father, Mayor Morgenstern, as he was known at that time. They changed their name later on to Starr. They Americanized it, you know, but that wasn't their real name either Morgenstern. Morgenstern was, the names were changed a lot of times, you know, among these people.
Sure. Thank you very much, Otto,
okay, all right, thank you very much.
Sharing a powerful testimony with us.
Hopefully these things don't happen again.